Something inside him didn't die. It retreated. And what looks like indifference is often the loudest cry you will never hear, because when an avoidant man stops caring, he isn't becoming free. He is becoming trapped in a prison of his own making. Look closely at this phenomenon, not through the lens of surface behavior, but through the deeper architecture of the psyche. The avoidant man does not simply lose interest. That is a convenient illusion. What truly occurs is far more complex, far more unsettling. He disconnects, not because nothing is there, but because what is there feels overwhelming, unmanageable, even dangerous to his sense of self. And so, instead of confronting the storm within, he numbs it, he silences it. He convinces himself that detachment is strength, when in reality, it is a quiet surrender. If this resonates, if you've seen this pattern, felt this distance, or recognized this silence, pause for a moment and reflect. Share this with someone who needs to understand what's really happening beneath the surface, because awareness is the first step toward transformation. Avoidance in a man is often misunderstood as a lack of feeling, when in reality it is usually an excess of feeling that has nowhere safe to go. What appears on the surface as indifference is, beneath it, a carefully constructed defense against emotional exposure. The avoidant man does not wake up one day empty. He gradually learns that closeness carries a cost, that vulnerability invites discomfort, and that expressing need can threaten his sense of control. Over time, he internalizes the belief that distance is safer than connection, and this belief begins to shape how he experiences and responds to emotional intimacy. Instead of processing emotions openly, he suppresses them, pushing them into the unconscious where they remain active but unseen. This creates a paradox within him. On one hand, he may still feel attachment, curiosity, even longing, but on the other hand, he resists acknowledging these feelings because doing so would require him to confront uncertainty and potential rejection. The result is not the absence of care, but the distortion of it. His care becomes indirect, hidden, and often expressed through withdrawal rather than presence. This pattern is reinforced by a desire to maintain autonomy. He may equate emotional dependence with weakness, interpreting closeness as a threat to his independence. So when emotions intensify, instead of leaning in, he pulls away. This withdrawal is not a calculated act of cruelty. It is an instinctive move to restore internal balance. However, the more he relies on avoidance, the less capable he becomes of tolerating genuine emotional experiences. His threshold for vulnerability lowers, and even small moments of intimacy can feel overwhelming. Internally, this creates tension. The parts of him that seek connection do not disappear. They remain active, often manifesting as restlessness, irritability, or a vague sense of dissatisfaction. Yet because he does not consciously engage with these feelings, he attributes them to external circumstances rather than recognizing their true origin. This disconnect between his inner world and outward behavior deepens the cycle of avoidance. Over time, what began as a protective strategy becomes a limiting pattern. His emotional world becomes restricted, not because he lacks depth, but because he has learned to guard it so tightly that even he cannot fully access it. When an avoidant man appears to stop caring, what is actually happening is less like a switch turning off and more like a system shutting down under pressure. Emotional shutdown is a protective response, not a peaceful state. It emerges when the internal experience becomes too intense, too confusing, or too threatening to process in a conscious way. Rather than confronting the discomfort, the mind moves to dampen it, creating a sense of numbness that mimics indifference. This numbness can feel like relief at first because it reduces anxiety and restores a sense of control, but it comes at the cost of emotional connection. The shutdown process often begins subtly. He may start by limiting how much he expresses, choosing silence over vulnerability, distraction over reflection. As tension builds, he distances himself not only from others, but also from his own feelings. Thoughts become more rationalized, stripped of emotional depth, and interactions become functional rather than meaningful. This creates the illusion that he is unaffected, when in reality he is actively suppressing what he cannot comfortably face. The more he practices this suppression, the more automatic it becomes, until detachment feels like his natural state. However, emotional systems do not simply disappear because they are ignored. Beneath the surface, unresolved feelings continue to exist, often intensifying because they are not being processed. This can lead to internal contradictions. He might experience sudden irritation without understanding why, or feel a vague emptiness that nothing seems to fill. Because he has disconnected from the source of these feelings, he may misinterpret them as signs that something external is wrong, reinforcing his decision to withdraw even further. Another important aspect of this shutdown is the loss of emotional responsiveness. When he numbs himself to avoid discomfort, he also dulls his ability to experience positive emotions. Warmth, excitement, and genuine engagement become harder to access. This creates a flattened emotional landscape where everything feels muted. Over time, this can shape his identity, leading him to believe that he simply does not feel as deeply as others, when in truth, he has conditioned himself not to feel. The danger lies in how sustainable this pattern can seem. Because shutdown reduces immediate discomfort, it can be repeatedly reinforced, making it difficult to recognize the long-term consequences. What started as a way to cope gradually becomes a barrier that limits his ability to connect, to understand himself, and to engage fully with life. Detachment in an avoidant man is rarely a sign of clarity or strength. It is more often a strategy designed to maintain a sense of control when emotions begin to feel unpredictable. Control becomes central to his internal world because unpredictability is associated with discomfort, and discomfort is something he has learned to minimize at all costs. When emotional intensity rises, whether through closeness, expectation, or internal conflict, he experiences it as a loss of stability. Rather than navigating that instability, he moves to eliminate it by withdrawing, creating distance, and convincing himself that disengagement is a rational choice. This need for control is deeply tied to how he interprets vulnerability. Instead of seeing vulnerability as a natural part of connection, he perceives it as exposure, something that leaves him open to judgment, rejection, or emotional overwhelm. In response, he builds a system where he regulates not only what he expresses, but also what he allows himself to feel. Detachment becomes the mechanism through which he filters his experience, reducing complexity into something more manageable. It gives him the illusion that he is unaffected, that he is operating from logic rather than emotion, even though this logic is shaped by an underlying fear he does not fully acknowledge. Over time, this controlled detachment begins to shape his perception of reality. He may start to reinterpret meaningful interactions as insignificant, not because they lack importance, but because acknowledging their importance would require him to engage emotionally. This reinterpretation allows him to maintain consistency with his self-image as someone who is independent and unaffected. However, this comes at a cost. By continuously reframing emotional experiences as irrelevant, he distances himself from the very signals that guide human connection and fulfillment. Internally, the effort to maintain this level of control creates strain. Emotions do not disappear simply because they are suppressed. They remain active beneath the surface, often emerging in indirect ways such as restlessness, distraction, or subtle dissatisfaction. Because he does not connect these experiences to their emotional origins, he may attribute them to external factors, reinforcing his belief that detachment is justified. What makes this pattern particularly complex is that it can appear functional from the outside. He may seem composed, self-sufficient, and unaffected by situations that would unsettle others. Yet this composure is not the result of true emotional regulation, but of avoidance. The control he maintains is fragile, dependent on his ability to keep distance from anything that might challenge it. The withdrawal of an avoidant man is often less about what is happening externally and more about an internal perception that something within him is not enough. This sense of inadequacy does not always appear as a clear, conscious thought. Instead, it operates subtly, shaping how he interprets closeness and emotional demand. When connection deepens, it brings with it an unspoken expectation to be present, responsive, and emotionally available. For someone who doubts his ability to meet those expectations, this can create a quiet but persistent pressure. Rather than risk falling short, he steps back, choosing distance over the possibility of being exposed as insufficient. This dynamic is rooted in how he relates to his own self-worth. If he carries an internal belief that he is not fully capable of handling emotional complexity, then intimacy becomes a situation where that belief might be confirmed. Even neutral interactions can be filtered through this lens, making them feel heavier than they are. A simple moment of closeness can be interpreted as a test he might fail, a situation where he could be judged, misunderstood, or found lacking. Instead of confronting these fears directly, he avoids the scenario altogether, convincing himself that disengagement is the more rational path. His ego, in this context, acts as both protector and barrier. It seeks to preserve a stable image of competence and independence, shielding him from situations that could threaten that image. By withdrawing, he maintains control over how he is perceived, at least in his own mind. He does not have to face the uncertainty of whether he can meet emotional expectations, because he has removed himself from the environment where those expectations exist. This creates a temporary sense of safety, but it also prevents growth, as the very experiences that could challenge and expand his sense of self are the ones he consistently avoids. Over time, this pattern reinforces itself. Each act of withdrawal confirms his belief that distance is the safer option, while also preventing him from gathering evidence that might contradict his fears. The result is a narrowing of his emotional world. He becomes less willing to engage deeply, not because he lacks the capacity, but because he has conditioned himself to associate depth with risk. Internally, this can lead to a quiet conflict. A part of him may still desire connection and meaning, but another part resists, prioritizing protection over possibility. This tension is rarely resolved because it is rarely confronted directly, leaving him in a state where withdrawal feels necessary, even when it limits his ability to experience genuine fulfillment. Emotional neglect in an avoidant man is often misinterpreted as a deliberate disregard for others, when in reality it tends to reflect an unresolved conflict within himself. The outward behavior, distance, inconsistency, lack of responsiveness can appear intentional, as though he has consciously decided to withdraw care. However, this external pattern is usually the byproduct of an internal struggle he has not fully recognized or learned to manage. What looks like neglect is frequently the consequence of being disconnected from his own emotional processes. At the core of this dynamic is a difficulty in identifying and regulating feelings. When emotions arise, especially those tied to closeness or vulnerability, they can feel ambiguous or overwhelming. Instead of being able to name and work through them, he experiences them as a kind of internal noise, uncomfortable but unclear. Because he lacks a clear framework for engaging with these feelings, he defaults to avoidance. This avoidance is not selective. It does not only block out discomfort, it also limits his ability to respond with warmth, empathy, and presence. As a result, his interactions may seem emotionally sparse, even when there is underlying care that is not being expressed. This creates a gap between intention and behavior. He may not consciously intend to neglect, but his inability to stay connected to his own emotional state makes it difficult to remain engaged with others. When situations require emotional availability, he may feel pressure without understanding why, leading him to retreat rather than respond. From the outside, this retreat can feel like indifference or rejection, but internally, it is often experienced as relief from a tension he cannot easily resolve. Another layer of this pattern involves how he interprets emotional needs. If he associates emotional expression with instability or weakness, he may view both his own needs and the needs of others as something to minimize. This perspective reinforces his tendency to disengage, as he believes he is maintaining balance by not becoming too involved. However, this belief prevents him from recognizing that emotional engagement is not a loss of control, but a necessary component of meaningful connection. Over time, the disconnect between his internal world and external behavior becomes more pronounced. The more he avoids engaging with his own emotions, the less capable he becomes of recognizing and responding to emotional cues in others. This can make his interactions feel distant and unfulfilling, even though the underlying issue is not a lack of capacity, but a lack of integration within himself.